Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. President was in New York on Tuesday showcasing his $292 million mega grant to help build a new rail tunnel under the Hudson River, something the New York, New Jersey area desperately needed. This is part of a $1.2 billion grant program that's going to help rebuild the roads and bridges there in the big city, in the Big Apple. Anybody who's gone through there, if you've sat waiting for hours to get over the GW or had to go through the Holland or the Lincoln tunnels or sat on the Verrazano or the Cross Bronx or the Whitestone or any of the bridges that, well, back up quite frequently, you realize the need for infrastructure long overdue, and this president delivering on it. And today was there to say, look, this is exciting stuff. This is good stuff. They began the critical stage of that first stage of getting that tunnel through the extension through the Hudson Tunnel project. This is big. This is a big blanking deal. And as he tweeted out, one of the things about the infrastructure law that he's excited about is the fact that doing it with American workers, doing it with American products, and yes, union labor. It's one of those things that the tale of two bridges. I love the story. You got the Tappan Zee in New York that they rebuilt with all union labor under a project labor agreement, done on time, under budget, and well built. And then that one they built out in California with Chinese welders that's never going to get done. That was well over budget and well over time. And again, never going to get finished. And it's this idea that, we're going to reinvest in this country in a big way. We need more, but this is what we got. In a big way, we're moving forward to do this. And he said, look, the reality is, for the past 4 decades, we haven't been bringing the working class up. The middle class has been crushed. He tweeted out, too many of us left behind amid economic upheaval of the past 4 decades. They remember the jobs that went away and wonder whether a path even exists anymore for them to succeed. But I know we can forge a path of building an economy where no one is left behind. And I read this and I'm going, yeah, this is the stuff. This is what brings us together. So I had the audacity, the unmitigated gall to take to the Twitters and say, hey, it's time to put down the red hats and the blue hats and to pick up a hard hat. It's time to reunite, rebuild, and reunionize. That's it. And the trolls. And the trolls came marching out. And they did. Bigly. The trolls came out bigly with their ready-made memes and their, all of their talking points from the various dark money front groups and the billionaire think tanks that have, filled their head with outrage candy, all divisive, all angry, all mostly wrong, but fun. And look, I love every once in a while to play with the trolls. I love the idea of, getting them all, John 4738629, who's got 1 follower, he's got, all this ready-made stuff. Seems really calculated. Makes you go, I wonder if he's real. Susan 438796. I wonder if that's their social security number or if it's some kind of MAGA. I don't know. If someone can explain, I'd love to find out. But they all were on the same page. All attack, all with the most angry, irrational arguments. Angry at government, angry at Joe Biden, and of course, insulting. And it's all meant to push this frame that government's bad. Joe Biden's terrible. Democrats hate everybody. And you go, he's investing in infrastructure. This was something that nobody used to complain about. This was something that the bottom line was fixing the pothole out in front of your house was the most basic function that you wanted your representatives to do. And yet, well, they're somehow somehow something they find divisive in this. And again, it comes down to this. It's Biden doing it. And this hatred, this irrational hatred that you see from them is really frustrating. Now, what's angering to me is, and look, there's anger to go around. You look at most major cities, and look, Biden's talking about investing in New York, investing in Baltimore, another rail tunnel that they're rebuilding. We've sold off our parking authorities. We've sold off our water. We've sold off our sewer. We've sold off our power companies. We've sold virtually everything that used to be held by we the people. And we're getting gouged at every front. And the thing is, and this is where, in reading some of the outrage, because there's a narrative that the right keeps pushing that, again, this is what you do when you need to divide. What they know is all you have to do is squeeze the American people a little bit. Corporate America knows this. Raise the prices a little, price of gas, price of eggs, shoes, sugar, whatever. And we'll howl. We'll howl at government while simultaneously crying that, if we do anything on the corporate front, it's somehow socialism. The dirty little secret? Governments don't control prices. Sorry, our government doesn't control the price. And if I were to sit here and suggest that they do, oh my gosh, the collective whine that would go on. The troll farm, and look, a lot of these comments, they're bots and they're trolls and or people who just don't have any idea of what to do. So when I said, hey, I want to reunite the working class of this country, I want to unite us. Immediately, well, if you don't agree with me, then you're not going to reunite. And this is where I got into this conversation of we need to unite as a country around ideas that are going to move us forward. Infrastructure can be one of those things. Reshoring manufacturing can be one of those things. There are things we can come together on. We don't always have to be sliced and diced like the corporations want us to be, like the wealthy want us to be, like the elites want us to be. There are things that we could say, hey, we demand a better existence. There are things that we agree on. For instance, I give you, the story came out today, ExxonMobil, record year, record profits, $55.7 billion they had in profits in 2022. But somehow, magically, and now look, they're not the only one, the only energy company that's gouging our eyes out, but somehow that's Joe Biden's fault. Somehow them raising their prices to the point where they're pocketing $55.7 billion in profit. This is beyond all their costs, all their other stuff, profit. Somehow, Biden's the reason for gas prices going up. The story that Chevron, again, record year, billions in profit. They're going to buy $75 billion in their shares back over the next couple of years. $75 billion stock buyback. Last year, we had almost $1 trillion in stock buybacks. Corporate America saying, hey, we've made all this excess profit. In fact, we've made so much profit, we don't know what to do with it. We've got so much cash laying around, not a clue what to do with it. No productive use. Can't invest in new machinery, can't invest in new workers, can't invest in new ideas, can't in no new technology, nothing. We have no idea. So we're just going to hoard it. And as a government, as a people, we've decided through our government that we're not going to tax them. The tax bill that Trump rammed through, let them walk away scot-free. And then we complain that prices are too high. We complain that no one's doing anything to make lives better. Well, Biden's trying. A good thing, if I can digress for a second, these stock buybacks, like I said, in 2022, almost $1 trillion in stock buybacks. And we don't tax that. Apple over the last 5 years has had $409 billion in stock buybacks. $24.7 billion last year. Alphabet, which is Google, $15 billion in the third quarter of last year alone. $150 billion over the past 5 years. Meta, $100 billion over the past 5 years in stock buybacks. 6.6 last year. Microsoft, $170 billion over the last 5 years. Exxon, $4.5 billion in the third quarter of last year. It's like there's a massive redistribution of wealth happening here. It's like there's a hand in your pocket. It's like there's an invisible hand in your pocket. You know, the free market, that invisible hand that's robbing you blind because they're gouging your eyes out. And yet the troll farm, all they had to say is, it's all Biden's fault. Sorry, troll farm, not buying it. What Biden's doing on infrastructure, I begged for Trump to do. What Biden's doing on China, I applauded Trump for haphazardly starting. But what Biden's doing on the American economy, economic policy, on labor policy, that's got my attention. That's moving us in a direction that's going to rebuild, revitalize, and reunionize the middle class and a prosperous working class. Reshoring manufacturing, something that was music to my ears when Trump said it. We're going to bring jobs back. Did he actually do anything? The answer is no. There were no policies. Did he bring jobs back? No. We lost jobs under Trump. That's reality. You know the stuff that's going to reunite us? Making lives better. Bring those jobs back, those union jobs. Not some think tank meme or some idiotic tweet by Susan 4398675, but a job with good wages, good benefits, good opportunities, a future. That's how we unite the country. And I've been saying this all along. This is how we bring us back to the middle of the road. And those trolls, the haters, the ones who say, well, if you don't agree with everything I want, then I'm not going to play with, I'm taking my ball and going home. Go. And this is where my troll friends couldn't understand my position is, if you're not willing to come together and move forward, you're going to be left behind. And I'm okay with that. It's time for us to leave the dead weight behind and move forward on the things that we can get done. Infrastructure being one of them. Manufacturing policy, another. Moving in a direction that leaves a future for ourselves and our children, that should be what we're fighting for. But, you know, there's an interest in this country. And it's right there in front of us. There's a special interest. And it's those folks who sit in our corporate boardrooms and their ivory towers and dream up bad ideas on how to, lower wages, gouge us at the checkout counter, and keep us divided. And the more we throw memes at each other, and the more we slice and dice ourselves into different groups that can be pitted against one another, the more that invisible hand's going to rob us blind. That, my friends, that's where we need to unite. That's where we need to be coming together. Ignore the trolls. And, you know, my motto has always been, don't feed the trolls unless I'm bored and I need something to do. And that's what I did this afternoon. A bit of entertainment, watching the troll farm lose their mind. And it's like piranha and, you know, throwing a little bit of food into the piranha tank. They came. But at least we know who and where they are. And we can ignore them. And together we can move forward. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, or give us a call, 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk. If you're a fan of the show, you've heard our labor history in 2 segments, and you can hear them on the radio pretty much anywhere in the U.S. Labor history has never been more important than it is right now. So here's what we'd like you to do. Tell a teacher. Tell a teacher that labor history is important and that they can get digestible 2-minute lessons that are absolutely free. Free to download, free to use, free to share. Tell a teacher to go to thericksmithshow.com/history and help us put labor back where it belongs, in the classroom. You know, generations of American workers fought, bled, and died to build the American way of life. It's our job to keep their stories alive. Go tell a teacher that we're here to help them do just that. Find us at thericksmithshow.com/history. history today.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So there are a number of class action lawsuits going on against Kroger Corporation. The report I saw, the headline was great. Kroger facing 4 class action lawsuits over payroll mistakes. Over payroll mistakes. It's not their fault. It's a mistake. No. This is a systematic. If you listen to the union people who are saying, look, we've been arguing about this for months. We've been trying to make this right. We've been filing grievances. We've been doing all this stuff, and they're just not fixing the problem. Seems like systematic wage theft. Seems like the more wages they can hold back from people, longer they can hold on to it, well, the more they make. And there, as I said, a number of these class action suits are saying, look, you've cheated us out of holiday pay. You've cheated us out of wages. One guy said, there were 2 weeks in October and November of last year where they didn't bother paying him. And this is one of those moments where you go, is it that the company is so large that they don't know how to manage their employees? Or is this deceptive? Is this by, we're just going to make people miserable? We're going to create a system where we hold on to the cash a little bit longer. Because understand, payrolls as large as they are, holding back a week, 2 weeks, there's something there. Now, my question is, and I've got a lot of questions on this, and we've reached out to the UFCW Local 400 president to come on the program and explain the lawsuits. And because it's my understanding that class action lawsuits, thanks to the Roberts Court, are basically impossible. The AT&T versus Concepcion case, said, hey, if you screw enough people out of a small amount of money, that's great. They each have to individually sue you. They can't come collectively and file a class action. I got to wonder if some of this plays into it. But here again, this is where having a union is important. How many companies out there do this to their employees? Oh, it's computer snafu. Oh, we'll get you next week. Oh, we'll get you down the road, or you never get it. And I had one of these moments this past weekend where my oldest daughter, said, hey, I got a friend who's got a question. They feel that they're being cheated. They don't know what to do. They work for this company where the boss, has them come in early, makes them set things up, doesn't pay them, makes them work through their lunch, takes a half-hour lunch out of their paycheck, but never gives them the opportunity to take the lunch. There's all this stuff. So I talked to the friend and I said, look, this is your recourse without a union, without having a union representative. There's really, without a contract, there's very little that you can do without being direct, without standing up to the employer. Go to HR, say, hey, you're cheating me. Make a stance there. Go to the state, the wage and hour folks, and say, look, this is wage theft. But this means that the individual has to take on this massive corporation. The individual has to take on these powers, and most people don't. So the majority of people who get cheated out of wages, who are victims of wage theft, they do so as, well, it's just the cost of doing business. What am I going to do? You can't fight these big companies. You can't fight it. And it's one of these things where you go, well, what is wage theft? If you work overtime and you don't get time and a half, that's wage theft. If you're misclassified as an independent contractor, you're your own boss, but the person is telling you what to do, where to do it, how to do it, when to do it. You're an employee. You're just not being paid like one. Anything on the minimum wage front, if you're not getting paid minimum wage, anything if you're working and you're not being paid. For instance, you got to come in a half an hour early and set up. No, that's on your dime. No, you're going to work through your lunch. No, you're going to work through your breaks. No, you're going to work and not get paid. It's wage theft. And what we know is, according to statistics, we know that all of the stick-em-ups, all of the people walking into a bank or a gas station or a convenience store or anything, any of them, give me your monies. Wage theft outweighs that in multiples. And yet we don't spend enough time talking about it. So this Kroger case is more important to me than just the workers at the supermarket. It's about all those silent people throughout industry after industry who are being treated like this. It's a new system mistake. And the question is, how many people, miss, 15 minutes, half hour? That's what they're hoping. They're hoping they can cheat you on the ends. And what's frustrating is we've learned to take it. That's the part that's amazing to me. For all of the complaining that's out there, and like I said earlier, I spent time, listening to the trolls. And the trolls bashing unions. Oh, unions are horrible. Unions are no good. We don't need unions anymore. And yet we know wage theft is an enormous problem. We know working conditions and danger in a lot of working conditions. A huge problem. We're seeing these stories coming out of employers just horribly treating people, firing them via email or text, or just a complete dehumanization of work. And you go, unions don't matter anymore. Workers coming together and saying, we want decent treatment. We want to be treated with respect. We want the agreement that we made to be honored. See, that's the interesting part of all this. The money behind all of these troll farms, same money behind all of the union busting. Because the last thing that corporations want, the last thing the wealthy want are empowered workers. The last thing that the elites of this country want are people who are empowered to say, you know what, I want to share the economic pie. You don't hear that from the trolls. What you hear is how we divide, how we go after those people. Instead of saying, hey, how do we make sure everyone can raise a family? How can we make sure that everyone can put food on the table? How do we make sure that work matters and reward it? We hear the other stuff. We hear the divisive. We hear the destructive. Because my Twitter friends, my troll friends, they're destroyers. And again, I go back to this idea of uniting with destroyers. You can't do it. So the advice I gave to my daughter's friend was, first call your HR department and see what happens. Say, look, this is what I'm told. I got to take a lunch. They're taking it out of my check. I don't have time. I need to take my lunch. Or you need to pay me. And if that doesn't rectify the situation, you want to do it nicely, then you've got to go to the state and say, look, and maybe talk to your other coworkers and see if it's happening to them, and organize around the idea that collectively you come together and you go to the state and say, this is a systematic problem of this company that's cheating us. And this person's like, oh, I don't know that I can do that. There was this tension, this fear. That fear, that feeling, that's what corporations want. That's when they know they've won. And they've spent a lot of money to achieve this on union busters who every time there's an organizing campaign come in and harass and intimidate and threaten and fire people illegally. They don't care about the law. And it puts us in our place. So the question I keep coming back to, instead of being a Twitter troll and saying, oh, eggs, how about we hold these companies accountable? How about we come together and organize around the idea of holding the wealthy and the powerful accountable and actually moving forward? I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, or my direct messages are always open on the Twitters and on the social medias. By all means, do that. I want to hear your thoughts, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Interesting times. You miss any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast. Wherever you find your favorite podcast, you'll find ours. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2006. That was the day 7,000 teachers and staff at the Orleans Parish School District in New Orleans, Louisiana, were fired. The public schools were considered some of the worst in the country. The school district was also bankrupt. It was unable to account for $71 million in federal funds. After Hurricane Katrina, the school district lost nearly its entire tax base. The district canceled all pay and health insurance insurance for its teachers and staff. Then, the state of Louisiana seized control of most of the city's 128 schools. A majority were either closed or turned over to charter school operators. The school district fired its remaining teachers and staff. It was a union-busting maneuver against the United Teachers of New Orleans. The union was an AFT affiliate. Organized in 1972, it was the first integrated education union in the South. Its membership overwhelmingly consisted of African American women. After the schools were turned over to the charters, they were replaced by inexperienced Teach for America workers. Many of these new teachers did not have any teacher certification. A class action lawsuit soon followed. In 2014, Louisiana's Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals found that teachers and staff were not given due process and had the right to be rehired as schools reopened after Katrina. The damages could amount to $1.5 billion. 10 years after Katrina, a New York Times article asked the question, was Hurricane Katrina the best thing ever to happen to the education system in New Orleans? As Education Secretary Arne Duncan once said, the answer has been a resounding no. In the years since, the union has fought successfully to organize many of the charter schools in New Orleans. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
An old political saying notes that the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. However, given the proliferation of today's goofball culture wars and fanatical right-wing phobias, that truism should be updated to say evil swarms when power-hungry leaders unleash the crazies. Which brings us to the U.S. House of Representatives, now led by a run-of-the-mill corporate Republican, Kevin McCarthy. He's always been a crassly ambitious political climber, untethered to any moral principle larger than his own ego. So he's not trusted, even by GOP lawmakers. Indeed, in an almost comical public spectacle, it took 4 days and 15 rounds of voting in January before Kevin could cut enough desperate deals to get the slimmest majority of his own Republican colleagues to make him Speaker of the House. To squeak out his win, though, he had to hand big chunks of his official power to a gaggle of extremist, far-right-wing legislators who are, in a word, bonkers. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Paul Gosar, and other members of the GOP's Kooky Caucus promote unhinged QAnon conspiracy theories, warn that Jews are firing lasers from outer space to start wildfires, lionize Vladimir Putin and Adolf Hitler, call for the execution of Democratic leaders, and insist that the government is staging school shootings as an excuse to outlaw guns. Okay, they're nuts, and politics makes strange bedfellows. But McCarthy has not just climbed into bed with them. He's snuggling up tightly, naming them to powerful committees, publicly legitimizing their screwballism, and intentionally bringing the evil of bigotry, intolerance, and even fascism in from the fringe of politics to sit in the seat of power. This is Jim Hightower saying, this is shameful, and it's dangerous. Evil swarms when so-called leaders meekly give permission for crazies to use the government power to rule over us.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So a new morning consult poll out. And it's one of those ones you go, I know you do these pollings because you want to get a sense of where people are, but not surprising here. Not surprising at all. It found that 57% of registered voters support the idea of revoking China's permanent normal trade relation status. 57% actually seems low to me. And I think the more we talk about this and the more explain just how bad it has been, the more I expect that number to go up. Now, the reason that this has been taken and the reason that this is on the table is you got a couple of Republican senators who have come forth with the idea of doing just that, and about time. Maybe they've been listening to the show. Maybe. Because it's something I've been calling for a while. And here to share some thoughts on, what the Republican senators have in mind, what it might look like, and, where it could take us. I've asked our good friend Scott Paul to come talk with us. Scott is the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, their website. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, it is great to be with you this evening, as always.
So let's start with this bill that I guess Rick Scott from Florida,
Yeah.
Vance from Ohio, I guess you've got Tom Cotton, Bud from North Carolina. They've come forth and said, hey, we want to undo this. What does their legislation say at this point? What do they want to do?
Yeah, so there's a feature in trade law called Permanent Normal Trade Relations, or PNTR. Sounds very confusing. It is a little bit, but basically, countries that get this get the guaranteed lowest tariff rate for their imports coming into the United States of America without any review at all. And so, this is generally reserved for countries that we have strong relationships with and that abide by the rule of law. Unfortunately, China has had this status since 2000. Okay, and it was part of the terms of entry for China to get into the World Trade Organization. And these senators were like, this is a bad idea. We don't think we should do this. I will say this is not a new idea. I mean, I've thought that we ought to be revoking this for about the last 15 or almost 20 years.
I've actually been the last 23 years.
Yeah.
Because I thought it was a bad idea from the beginning.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, I have a big poster at home that says "No blank check for China," which has aged pretty well over those 23 years. You're right, but also, like, I think Ro Khanna and a couple of progressive Democrats suggested doing this last Congress too. So this is something that should have some bipartisan appeal. But so basically, what this would do, it would say, China, you're back up to a higher tariff rate on your products that, by the way, aren't already subject to punitive tariffs that we've put on some Chinese products, on their steel, on other products through a trade law provision called Section 301. And China would basically have to earn its status back, and the Congress would have to vote to give it back, which I don't know that a lot of lawmakers would want to do. Also worth pointing out that we have revoked permanent normal trade relations for other countries before. In fact, there was a bipartisan vote in the Senate to revoke it for Russia, 100-0. I mean, I don't know anything that's passed 100-0, but that did. So, and look, not that China has invaded a country yet, but we also know that the economic, cyber, military, other types of aggressive moves that China is making bear some scrutiny. In addition, and you referenced this, Rick, to the 23 years of destruction because China hasn't been following the rules at all, and what that's meant to U.S. industrial capabilities, to the middle class in this country. And so yeah, I think that this is a something that the Senate ought to do.
No, I agree. But here's the thing. One of the things I've been talking about Biden about it, and that I'm happy about, is the policy of moving us away from, the kind of globalization that we've become accustomed to over the last couple of decades. This idea that, countries that trade don't fight each other. No, they just fight each other on different grounds. I mean, we're still at war. I believe we're at war with China and have been for a very long time. It's just been an economic war. And they've been kicking our behinds because we've given away our manufacturing. It's not even like we lost it. We gave it away.
Yeah, we sure did. And the interesting thing, Rick, I think about this is that, unlike other kind of conflicts we've had in the past, whether they were hot or cold, we normally haven't been coupled to that economy. Like, we were not coupled to the Soviet economy or to the Korean economy in the 50s, or to the Vietnamese economy or the Iraqi economy, although, the oil companies certainly liked getting stuff out of there. But we are coupled to the Chinese economy. And that brings a whole nother level of consideration. And this is where I think Biden has been pretty strategic, is that, seeing a need to unwind a lot of this, particularly where we have vulnerabilities like in semiconductors and high technology, and saying we got to take the first steps to make sure that we're not handing China the keys to the car here, and that we have some of our own capabilities. And so we're building that up at the same time. But it takes a degree of, I think, policy sophistication that we didn't have to necessarily have for some of these other conflicts, whether they've been hot or cold,
Yeah.
that we've experienced in the post World War II era.
No, and to point that out, I mean, imagine, during the Cold War, if we were buying, communications gear from the Soviets. I mean, the Biden administration right now evidently is considering cutting off Huawei technologies from being able to access American suppliers like Intel and Qualcomm. And you go, explain to me why it is we do business with them with all on this level, and how it is that they get their technology into any of our military supply is well beyond my capability to understand.
Yeah. Yeah, and part of it is, I mean, it's a complex question, and there's complex answers to it, and there's a lot of different factors. But one of them has been that we too often, from either a governmental, a corporate, or even a consumer perspective, have been willing to look the other way, and have turned a blind eye to some of the challenges that all of this represent. And part of the reason, Rick, is that it has been too good to be true, right? That low price that you get, too good to be true. And so that does, as we've learned, carry some cost with it that just maybe not reflected in that T-shirt at Walmart, but it's been reflected in many, many other ways, from that loss of capability to more carbon emissions to building up potentially an adversarial military power. And so now we're at a point of reckoning. And I think that's what the challenge is. And, everybody who was saying, oh, this whole China experiment, this is going to be awesome. And believe me, that was like 90% of national politicians and virtually all of the national media, 23 years ago. Now, most of them are saying, you know what, it didn't work out. Sorry, but the answer isn't to do things like repeal PNTR. It's to try harder. And I just, that baffles me somewhat to hear that, because it is wishful thinking. And that's what got us into this mess in the first place. So I think we have to be very strategic, very conscious of what lies ahead. But part of this, uncoupling of key technologies, key sectors is going to be very important. And we certainly, I don't think that the Chinese Communist Party deserves the lowest tariffs we have to offer a country that we don't have a free trade agreement with. And so I think that's a huge mistake. And that's something simple that we ought to be able to take off.
No, and it's something that should be nonpartisan. And again, I come back to this idea of uniting the country. This should be one of those things that unites us around the idea of reshoring manufacturing, ensuring our military gets what they need, ensuring that we have jobs in communities that support family. This sounds like, well, the stuff that would unite us.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it would. And my hope is that, well, first of all, the four Republican senators who introduced this don't have the ability to move it on their own. And so at this point, it's kind of a message bill. So the key is going to be, where do we see some of the Democratic kind of China hawks in the Senate? What do we see in the House of Representatives? Are the House Republicans going to move on this? Or are they just going to say, hey, we have this committee, we're looking at everything, and in the meantime, we're going to park everything else? So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But I do think that it sends the right signal.
Yeah. It's an excellent point you make, though, that this is a message bill, because it's telling that these Republicans, who I find, to be honest, policy-wise on the things that they want to do, Rick Scott's 11-point plan to destroy Social Security, you go down the list, I find none of that acceptable. But on this, they're signaling that their base wants this too. So this is, again, somewhere where we can come together and put down the red hat and the blue hat and start picking up that hard hat.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. And, one thing that I know these senators, and this is a related topic, but one that is open up to a lot of discussion. several of these senators in particular want to try to build bridges between the Republicans and conservatives and the working class, right? And so, um, the rest of their policies generally don't represent that, I will say, right? If they had strong support for labor unions and the right to organize and better wages and benefits, feel a little bit differently
Yep.
about it, but it's certainly part of that effort as well. But I do think that Chuck Schumer has actually been a China hawk for a long time. He had a China currency bill with Lindsey Graham, 15 years ago that I remember, and obviously Sherrod Brown and others. And so I do think there's the potential for for some meeting of the minds here as we look ahead. But I'm glad. Look, I'm glad that this is a topic of conversation, much more fruitful than some of the other topics of conversation that they're going to be having.
No, absolutely. No, because I think both of us are old enough to remember there used to be pro-labor Republicans. There used to be members of the Republican Party who stood up for prevailing wage and for smart policies that help working people. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show here with Scott Paul. Scott's the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. AmericanManufacturing.org is their website if you want to check out more on what they do. And I want to change gears a little bit because I made reference a little bit ago that we're at war with China. It's just a different war. It's an economic war. They've been stealing our technology for years, and doing it without recourse. And look, I know NPR has done a bit on this as well. That we spend all this money on patents and technology and research and development, and it ends up getting stolen or taken by someone else. And yet we haven't done an awful lot about it. How do we address this?
Yeah, it's a great question, and this is a little bit wonky, but there's a lot of federally funded research that occurs, and there are hundreds, in fact, there's thousands of patents that are derived from that federally funded research. And the way that it works, that if a private sector company wants to take that patent and manufacture, there's some rules that they have to follow. One of those rules is supposed to be they need to make it in the United States of America, if at all possible. Okay, and this has been the law for a couple of decades, actually, but it is widely ignored. Not a priority for any of the agencies. They routinely sign off on waivers on this. They've been doing it for decades. It's not a Democratic or Republican thing. It's everybody.
It's a swinging door thing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so NPR uncovered a case where there was this great, where federal researchers had spent 6 years, like $15 million, coming up with a new battery technology using a compound called vanadium. So it's a vanadium redox battery, and exciting because it can basically provide a lot of battery storage and then power something, in an urgent situation for a long period of time. Remarkable technology. Unfortunately, it got licensed right away to a company that said, we're going to make it in China, and the Energy Department looked the other way. We lost jobs, we lost capability. China gained capability, but this came to light thanks to an investigation, and a bipartisan team, including Tammy Baldwin, Marco Rubio, Rob Portman, got a law passed that said we're going to really enforce this, and we're going to start with Homeland Security, and we're going to move out from there to other agencies. But I do think that it's one of those things that, look, we spend a lot of money on federally funded research. We should, because there's some extraordinary things that come out of that. But we got to make it in America, and it's just one of those jaw-dropping things. You're like, how is this even possible? But again, lawmakers are stepping up to the plate. I think we're going to make some progress, but it's only because some sunlight was shed on what was happening behind the scenes here.
Is the last line of questioning I've got for you, because this is one of those things that I keep looking for, that thing that's going to bring us together as a country. War and bad times seems to be, I think, Pearl Harbor, I think 9/11, those are the times when we came together the most. We're in an economic war, I believe, with China. They've been robbing and stealing and their mercantilist tactics and have been crushing us, and our cities are hollowed out. They didn't drop bombs, At least not the ones that come out of planes, but economic ones that have caused real harm and damage. Is this not the kind of discussion we need to have? Now, I saw a Republican legislator the other day said that he thinks this Mike McCall from Texas. He says that he thinks, within a couple of years, a war with China in 2025 is likely. I don't know if that's dangerous speak or if that's preparing people for the reality of what has to happen. I don't know, but I'm curious your thought.
Yeah, I look, I'm not that much of a international security strategic kind of chess master to know exactly what's going to happen. But I think the scenario that's being presented is a very real and possible one, and it's kind of based on this idea that there are going to be elections in Taiwan to elect a president there. And if it's not a president that the government in Beijing thinks they can work with, then China may decide we got to go in. This is the time, and that would put it in about two years or so. And so that is, incredibly frightening to think about. But at the same time, our military has to be prepared, and we have to do everything we can to deter China from making that choice, because it would be a tragic one. For not only Taiwan, but for China. It's something that we'd want to avoid, but it is it's on the table, because that's what Beijing has said, fundamentally.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I get my troll farm folks saying this is all Biden's fault because we're standing up to China and we're doing stuff. So Biden's making this happen.
Yeah. No. I mean, that's certainly not true at all. And you look at, if you look at the harshest rhetoric, it tends to come from the right on that. It's interesting if you look at the effective actions, it's coming from Biden and how he's preparing us both here at home by building up our own capabilities and also, again, having smart sanctions to ensure that, if China is going to develop from a technological point of view, it's not going to be because they're taking our stuff and doing it. So yeah, it's not Biden warmongering. In fact, I think that they want to do everything possible to avoid something like this, but at the same time, got to be prepared.
Got to take care of the home.
And those are the steps that the administration is taking right now.
There you go. I'm right there. Scott, I appreciate the time as always. Thanks so much, and keep up the great work.
All right. Right back to you, Rick. Thanks so much.
Appreciate it. Our good friend Scott Paul. Make sure you check out the website, AmericanManufacturing.org. We'll get links out on social media. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. What policies should we be pursuing? Want to hear it? rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1865. That was the day the United States Congress passed the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, abolishing slavery. President Abraham Lincoln had already issued the Emancipation Proclamation, but there was worry that the proclamation, an emergency wartime measure, would not stand up in the courts after the war had ended. The introduction of the amendment first occurred in 1864 as the Civil War raged on. That meant that only Northern legislators were present to debate the issue. Despite this, the amendment failed to pass the House of Representatives. Determined to ensure its passage on the second try, President Lincoln made the amendment part of the National Republican platform for the presidential election. He lobbied heavily for the bill and was able to win enough support for its passage. The New York Times described the scene after the vote in the House of Representatives, writing, "No attempt was made to suppress the applause, which came from all sides, everyone feeling that the occasion justified the fullest expression of approbation and joy." The final amendment read, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist in the United States or any place, subject to their jurisdiction. The amendment then had to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. The ratification marked a fundamental change in the labor system of the United States. No more would the nation be divided by free labor and slave labor laws. Kentucky did not officially ratify the 13th Amendment until 1976, and Mississippi did not follow until 1995. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Reality is we've got a real China problem, and we've had it for a very long time. The problem is greed. It's been greed. Corporate greed got us there. Our greed got us there. And, I listen to people, I used to be able to buy stuff. When Trump was president, prices were low. Yeah, China wasn't shut down. Again, something that Biden has no control over. Corporate America was gouging, just not at the rate that we're gouging now. And, oh, by the way, and I had someone, remind me of this the other day, that after World War II, there was all that pent-up demand because people went through the war and didn't buy anything. My grandmother used to tell me that they would take a black, that eyeliner stuff, the mascara, whatever that is, with the pencil, and draw lines up the back of their legs to make it look like they were wearing nylons and stockings, but they didn't because they didn't have any of that stuff because you needed it for the war effort. There was massive inflation after the war. And it was how things were dealt with differently. We had labor unions that fought for higher wages so that people could afford the prices. We had strong government investment that built housing and all kinds of things that helped bring that down, to help meet the demands. We don't have those things now. What we've got is greed merchants who want to do everything they can do to hold on to the power that they have and manipulate the anger. Because look, I go to the store and I look at my grocery bill, angry too. But not angry at Biden, not angry at the worker who's asking for a raise. Angry at the corporations who are gouging our eyes out. That to me is where we should be focusing. But it was smart policies. And I go back to that FDR era, that inflationary period after World War II of people going, hey, it's party time. And my grandmother told me, right after the war, it was party time. Life was great. People were buying cars. People were buying houses. I mean, it was, the GI Bill had infused a huge amount of money into a working poor that had never been there before. My grandparents, when my grandfather got back from World War II, they were homeless. They were sleeping in their car. Now they got married, for the old-fashioned reason, they had to. And, grandma's, my great-grandfather threw them out. But they were homeless. And those years right after the war were boom years. Bought a house, bought cars, had their families, and didn't do it under massive debt. Why? Because the wages that my grandfather was earning were going up. He started off making 17 cents an hour, shoveling coal off the back of a coal truck 12, 14, 16 hours a day with no overtime. Smart policy raised that minimum wage up to $0.25 in 1935. Smart policy got him overtime after 40 hours. Unions got him overtime after 8 hours. Built a solid life. Smart policy. Did we have trolls back then? Sure, you had them. They just weren't as well funded, as well organized, and have something like Twitter and social media. It's time for us to put down the cesspool of social media and talk to each other again. That's my thoughts. Want to hear yours? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. You miss any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast. Wherever you find your favorite podcasts, you will find ours. In fact, you can make us your favorite podcast. And I want to hear it. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com.
a 1 in 100 year weather event, and we seem to be getting a lot of them at the moment.
Torrential rains and floods in New Zealand shatter all-time records. Building new wind and solar projects is cheaper than running existing coal plants, new study confirms. Plus, Biden protects northern Minnesota wilderness from mining for 20 years.
All of those somewhat good and somewhat not so good stories straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Without oil, we would lose so many precious products like hair gel, or the bottle the hair gel comes in, or the chemicals I use to get the hair gel out of my hair. And that's just my hair, Wanda. I mean, think of how much hair is in the world. Probably hundreds.
Look, okay.
Probably. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, astounding rainfall in New Zealand. Good Lord.
Yes, indeed. A state of emergency has been declared in Auckland, New Zealand, after a record-shattering deluge hit New Zealand's North Island on Friday, triggering extreme flash floods and landslides that caused significant damage across Auckland, shutting down the city, destroying hundreds of homes, and killing at least 4 people. Nearly 10 inches of rain in 24 hours obliterated Auckland's all-time single-day rainfall record. New Zealand's new Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, called the catastrophic deluge a signal to speed up efforts to prepare for more frequent and intense extreme weather disasters brought by man-made climate change.
Climate change is real. It's with us. It's having an impact on our weather. We are seeing more of these extreme weather events. We're going to have to deal with more of these extreme weather events in the near future. We need to be prepared for that, and we need to do everything that we can to combat the challenge of climate change.
Maybe one of the problems is this exchange with whoever this news reporter is speaking with the Prime Minister.
Do you think it's climate change?
Yes.
Why do we even need to ask a question like that at this point? It's insane.
Speaking of insane, here in the U.S., taxpayers in Pennsylvania may be on the hook for cleanup of thousands of abandoned oil and gas wells in the state. A new report by the State Department of Environmental Protection found that half of the conventional oil and gas operators failed to follow state law in reporting how much fossil fuel they pulled from the ground and reporting spills of drilling fluids onto the ground or into water.
Oh, oops.
And worse, agency inspectors found more than 3,000 newly abandoned wells in just 5 years.
3,000 abandoned wells.
Yep. Abandoned wells are sources of air, water, and soil pollution and leak dangerous climate-warming methane. The state estimates it already has 200,000 abandoned wells to clean up at an average cost of $30,000 per well.
The state has to clean that up.
Yep.
So the fossil fuel companies make the profits and then
skip town.
And the taxpayers left to clean up. Nice.
But some good news. A new study confirms that building new wind and solar projects costs less than keeping existing coal plants open in the U.S. That's due to long-term trends and the Democrats' Inflation Reduction Act. The new analysis by think tank Energy Innovation found that if power companies utilize the incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act that reduce the upfront cost of building wind and solar projects, then renewables beat all but one existing coal plant in the U.S. on cost.
Wow.
Doing so would also have external benefits like using much less water and result in immediately cleaner air and water. More good news. The world has enough rare earth minerals and other critical raw materials to complete the switch from fossil fuels to renewable energy to produce electricity and mitigate global warming.
Are you sure?
That's according to a new study that found the world has enough supplies of raw materials required to make the global transition away from fossil fuels, and that counters concerns about the supplies of such materials.
But that's going to require a whole lot of mining, is it not?
Yes, more mining will be needed, but the researchers calculated that it won't significantly worsen global warming or pollution, and they say overall it will be much less than the mining required for fossil fuels. The lead author told AP, quote, "Decarbonization is going to be big and messy, but at the same time, we can do it." Finally, the Biden Interior Department late last week effectively banned mining in northern Minnesota's pristine Boundary Waters Canoe Area wilderness for 20 years and revoked a mining and water pollution permit granted by the Trump administration to a foreign mining company. The department cited scientific data showing the mine would cause unavoidable and irreversible levels of toxic pollution in the watershed. The move is a victory for Native American tribes and protects the region's billion-dollar outdoor recreation economy.
So Donald Trump had given approval to a foreign company to come here and mine our stuff? What happened to America first? You know, I'm starting to not trust that guy. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So today, President Biden was front and center touting major investments in rail infrastructure, something we desperately need. Look, you know, I spent a lot of time in rail yards. We could use, especially on the freight rail side, we could really use some investment. And the passenger rail, wow, we're so far behind. We need massive investment. You want to help? You want to help solve traffic problems? I don't know. Maybe some high-speed rail. That'd be a good idea. Maybe we get to that. But also today, our friends over at UE, the UE union, they've come out calling for public ownership of those rails. An interesting idea. That's why I've asked their general president, Carl Rosen, to come talk with us. Carl's the general president of the United Electrical Radio and Machine Workers of America, ueunion.org, the website. Carl, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, I'm always happy to be here with you, Rick. Thanks for having me on.
So we got the president out touting the fact that we're investing in rails. We're gonna help make rail great again. I'm thrilled about that. Something we need to do. But you're saying, hey, we should maybe reclaim those rails. Am I getting that right?
Absolutely. I mean, it is true that we need, as a country, to invest in rail from many points of view. The pollution around rail yards, where a lot of working class people live. The impact on climate change of the combination of having old locomotives still on the rails because the rail companies aren't bothering to invest their profits in new equipment. The need to move a lot more freight off of trucks onto rail for protecting the environment, for reducing traffic congestion and accidents and wear and tear on the roads, which we all pay for as taxpayers, of course, to rebuild the roads that the trucks are pounding on the long distance runs that aren't necessary. So we really do need to invest in rail as a country. And so I'm glad to see these moves being made to rebuild these rail tunnels, and it'll put people to work, good jobs, good union jobs. Glad to see that. But why are we having to invest all this taxpayer money to help private corporations continue to make super profits and not bother investing at all in their own infrastructure that they make the money off of? They're playing the American people for suckers, and then you combine it with rail it's a natural monopoly. It's like utilities. It has to be regulated and even better to actually be run by the public. I mean, the best utilities in this country are the public utilities, which we've gotten away from in too many places. But in a lot of cases, we still have it, especially when you look at things like water and other things. Rails, you're not going to have multiple railroad companies running up and down the same set of tracks and not coordinating. That just doesn't work. It's wherever they're operating, they've kind of divided up the turf. They're monopolies. And we're basically allowing our government to let them run those monopolies purely for private profit. They aren't providing services. You've got companies all over the country screaming that they can't get the goods moved. it was a major contributing factor in how the whole supply chain got mucked up at the beginning of the pandemic, which is directly leading to the inflation that we've been facing. Fortunately, finally easing off, but that we have been facing over the last year and a half. And they don't contribute anything good, these railroad companies. And then they turn around and you see what they did to the workers this past contract cycle a couple months ago. Just atrocious. Because what they've done is they have cut down their number of staff so low in order to make even higher profits. Hell, they spent far more on stock buybacks this year than their entire labor bill.
Yeah, let that sink in. No, I mean,
yeah.
that's the remarkable part of all of this. I think, stock buybacks is one of those things that just has me crazy in this moment. I mean, corporations, the S&P 500 last year spent almost $1 trillion on stock buybacks. That's money that should have been going to wages for working people. We could spend an whole day on this, but the railroads in particular, because you're right, they have slashed staff, they have cut service, they've made trains enormously long, and I would argue much more dangerous than they should be, all so they can squeeze a little bit more out. But what do you say, Carl, to the person who believes, look, as bad as the companies are running things and as bad as they're doing, government would do it worse, Carl?
I say that's only because you're hearing the propaganda that's been put out there for a long time. Look at the U.S. mail system; delivers a phenomenal amount of mail on a daily basis all over this country, and that's a public good. That's what we need to be looking at here. You look at the European countries; almost all of them have public ownership of the rails in one form or another, which also allows them to plan for the long term, invest in what they need to invest in. It's part of why they've got electric trains almost everywhere, so they aren't killing themselves with diesel fumes, because they can make those investments for the long term. And that's where the company's profits should have been going, was investing in infrastructure and upgrading for the future, instead of just giving it away to their stockholders through the stock buybacks. But you're not going to get a private company to think about the long term. They're going to think about what's the next quarter look like for our stock owners. Yeah, and that's why it should be in private hands. It needs to be taken public.
Have we ever had that scenario in this country?
Well, we've had different pieces of it at different times. Certainly, the whole railroad industry collapsed. If you remember, we put together Conrail, which was a quasi government effort to get freight rail back on its feet, and Amtrak is essentially a government agency, unfortunately continually choked because they give freight precedent over it, and again because the highway interests have made sure that we never put too much money into passenger rail. I mean, there's historical things that have happened, like when GM purposely destroyed the rail system in Los Angeles, the local rail system, to make sure that everybody had to buy cars. I mean, that's what we have to fight back against as working people. We have to get back to having public goods that help all of society, that help all working people, and not everything just done for some few individuals to be able to make huge profits.
Now, my Twitter trolls would say, Carl, that you're talking about socialism, and socialism never works, Carl. That's what they've told me. It's all bad. It's all bad.
They work very hard to undermine it, but certainly socializing the most important parts of our society is the only way that we're going to progress as a human race.
Now, you brought up an interesting point about congestion and traffic. Everybody I know complains about how bad traffic is, especially truck traffic. And for me, the investments of today will help alleviate some of that. And this is why I give Biden credit. At least we're moving in a direction to invest in this stuff. But I agree with you. We're investing in this stuff for some of the wrong reasons of enriching these big corporations. Is there any movement outside of your union saying, hey, this doesn't make sense? Is there any legislative movement? Is there any movement of organizing going on? Is there any push for doing what you're talking about?
Sure. It's early in the process. You may have noticed that UE frequently is earlier in the process than some other unions come on board. We were speaking out in the early 90s about the need to organize immigrant workers and not vilify them. And it took about 10 years, and the rest of the labor movement got on board. So we're optimistic that a lot more of the union movement will come on board. But there are voices within the rail unions. There are groups of rank and file workers who are saying this is the way we need to go. And you can there's statements being made by various leaders. I think people were just really astonished at how rotten these railroad companies were in the course of imposing these contracts. Which sadly,
how can anyone, knowing the history of the railroads, not know that that the rail barons are some of the worst of the worst? How can you not know that?
Right. Well, and then they have, unfortunately, a Democratic administration, Democratic Congress come in behind them in imposing these terms this time around, even though I know there were a good number of Democrats, led, of course, by Bernie Sanders, trying to push back against it. But, it's shameful what folks ended up getting stuck here without the sick days.
I see this a little. I saw it as a moment, Carl, that I thought Democrats could have taken advantage of and said, look, this is a moment where we need everybody to get sick days. I never thought the rail workers were going to be allowed to strike. It doesn't happen. I knew they were going to impose something of a contract, but a national call to something higher, I expected, I wanted, I had hoped for, and I didn't get. And this is where Democrats, I think, fell down on this, especially on the messaging side of saying, look, for the economy's sake, we can't let this happen, but we got to get those guys sick days. We got to get those workers sick days. We got to get everybody sick days.
That's right. That's right. That it absolutely could have gone there. They had majorities in both houses at the time, but they come up with excuses why they can't get anything done. That damn filibuster. Oh my gosh. Just got in the way yet again. We're so sorry. It's one excuse or another, and this is why people have lost faith in the Democratic Party. The Republicans don't let things hold them back when they get into office.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is we've got an ineffective Democratic Party and a Republican Party that hates working people. It's a weird moment that we're in. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show here with Carl Rosen. Carl is the general president of the United Electrical Radio and Machine Workers of America, ueunion.org, the website, if you want to take a look at the work that they're doing and their call to put railroads under public ownership. Check that out. I want to get your thoughts also. Your union's been on a roll, a completely different topic. You've been on a roll organizing. I know union density went down last year, but your union's been out there, going like gangbusters. What are you doing?
Well, we're finding the workers who want to organize and helping them organize themselves is what we're doing. We're punching way above our weight. It's way beyond what we could do just based on the traditional, very staff-intensive model of organizing. We're putting the power right in the workers' hands, and who's especially interested in doing this are younger workers, folks who have come of age in the working class since the turn of the century. They realize this system is not working for them, and the government's not going to fix it, and the big business isn't going to fix it. They're going to have to fix it themselves by organizing. And so, we're finding places where there's just a tremendous response. And one area, and we organize in all kinds of sectors. So we've got organizing going on in manufacturing, in the service sector, in government subcontractors, et cetera. But one area we're having a lot of success right now is graduate workers at major universities who are, and it's research assistants as well as teaching assistants. Historically, research assistants were hard to organize, because of the nature of their work and the expectation of where they were going to be going and what their futures look like. And all of that's changed as the academic institutions have, reduced the number of quality jobs there, and then as they see what's happening with big business. And so we've been very fortunate. We just landed first contracts at the University of New Mexico and New Mexico State for about 2,500 workers. I'm right now helping lead negotiations for 3,800 graduate workers at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And we're expecting another group of about 1,500 fellows to unionize with us there here shortly when we get a labor board unit certification. And then we earlier this month had a unit of over 3,000 graduate workers at Northwestern University outside Chicago vote 93% to join UE. And today, as we speak, there are two elections going on, one at Johns Hopkins and another one in Baltimore, and the other at the University of Chicago, each with 3,000 plus additional graduate workers who are all voting to join UE. And they're helping organize each other. This is back to the basics of the labor movement from the 1930s, when the CIO was organized. My union was not organized by a bunch of professional organizers coming in. It was organized by the workers in those workplaces who built really strong unions and built unions they were proud of. They were their unions, right? It totally changes the sense of what your union is about when you are able to organize it yourself and you're not reliant on somebody higher up the bureaucracy who's making a lot of the key decisions. So we're giving that power to the workers to organize themselves and take it in the direction they need to meet their needs, and giving them the backing they need as they do it, and the training and the framework, but they're taking it and running with it, and it's just tremendous.
Yeah, it's about empowering people. And look, you're right. A lot of the younger people I talk to, they've watched their parents be ground down. They've watched their wages be suppressed. They've watched healthcare benefits get more expensive, retirement being eviscerated. They've watched them lose jobs. They've watched their parents' generation struggle in ways that they've decided, you know what, we're not going to do it. And good on them. It's about time. It's about time we stop. Well, it's about time we stop taking it.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and that's where they're at. And this is why I was referencing people who have come of age since the turn of the century. It's not only that they aren't going to be as well off as their parents; they can see that their parents aren't as well off as their grandparents, because this has been going on since the 1980s, maybe even the late 70s, the end of Jimmy Carter, and then certainly full slam with Reagan, and then Bush and Clinton and Bush. I mean, it just was continuous. And then, Obama squandered his opportunity when he didn't go big in the recovery from the financial crash. And instead, we just bled for 8 years. And then we got Trump, because of that, and bled some more. Fortunately, enough folks learned enough lessons. We had some good fights during the course of the last decade that really challenged this income and wealth inequality. Fight for 15 and Occupy Wall Street, all of those things that I think helped create the conditions where, we had at the beginning of the pandemic, both parties were kind of forced to cough up some money that made a difference for working people. We didn't see that in 2008, unfortunately, but we did this time, and it really helped a lot of folks, and it also helped create the conditions where there's less job fear right now, and therefore more willingness to organize, and that's important. We need to keep that going. Federal Reserve Board is bound and determined to break that if they can. That's what's going on with these interest rate hikes. They want to break the back of working people again, and we need to make noise and oppose it, and we need to change the system.
No, I'm right there with you. It's something we've got to do. So last question I've got, if someone wants to organize, they want to become a UE member, what do they do?
Go to our website, ueunion.org, O-R-G, and so it's ueunion.org. And there's space on there where you can send in questions, concerns, and register that you're interested in organizing with us. I'd also encourage folks to reach out to the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee, EWOC, which is a joint project of UE and DSA, and they can also help you get started on figuring out how to improve conditions at your workplace. Even if you're not ready to organize a union yet, you can still start to talk to your fellow workers about what you can do to improve things there.
There you go. Carl, always great talking with you. Good seeing you, buddy. Keep up the great work. I hope you come back and talk to us again real soon.
Will do. Looking forward to it. Take care, Rick. Thanks.
Good job. Congrats on the organizing. And look, this call for public ownership of rails, I want to hear your thoughts. Is this a good idea, bad idea? Should we reclaim the rails? Should we reclaim the commons, our water, our sewer, our roads, our bridges, our parking authorities, all of the things we've surrendered over the last several decades? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show. If you're a fan of the show, you've heard our labor history in 2 segments. and you can hear them on the radio pretty much anywhere in the U.S. Labor history has never been more important than it is right now. So here's what we'd like you to do. Tell a teacher. Tell a teacher that labor history is important and that they can get digestible 2-minute lessons that are absolutely free. Free to download, free to use, free to share. Tell a teacher to go to thericksmithshow.com/history and help us put labor back where it belongs, in the classroom. You know, generations of American workers fought, bled, and died to build the American way of life. It's our job to keep their stories alive. Go tell a teacher that we're here to help them do just that. Find us at thericksmithshow.com/history today.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
A couple emails from folks losing their mind over the idea of reclaiming the rails for the public. I'm not opposed to the idea. Look, it's a monopoly. You've got one set of rails. It's not like you can have competing companies on those rails. And you look at the fact that, it's a monopoly. They've got this kind of outweighed power to do whatever they want. And the contract fight last year was one of those things that was infuriating to me, because that was an opportunity to make lives better. And I think Democrats fell down on the job. And it wasn't all their fault. There was some problems all around on the messaging. But if you've got the president's ear, and this is where I give Biden some slack, because there are voices competing on both sides. There's the corporate wing of the Democratic parties. No, we can't get too far because we need corporate America to not go totally on the side of the Republicans, even though Republicans are kicking corporate America around a little bit. It's an interesting moment. And you've got the more progressive folks who are saying, look, we've got to make lives better. We got to do some stuff. There was a moment where you could have gone, look, there was a compromise point, because it wasn't like the railroads couldn't afford to provide sick days for those workers. It's not like they couldn't hire a couple more railroaders. It's not like they couldn't make some adjustments to their precision scheduling railroading. It's not like they couldn't. They didn't want to. And this is the problem with what's going on in our society today. You got all these corporations who are making huge amounts of profit. They could make lives better. They don't want to. They want to buy back their shares of stock. When these big companies, go on these stock buyback programs, the railroads are a perfect example. Billions of dollars in stock buybacks. You know what those stock buybacks represent? Wages that didn't get paid to those workers. Sick days that didn't get paid to those workers. The jobs that have been crushed over the last several decades. When I was a kid, and I remember this, now this is going back a while, there were like 10 guys on a train. You had a couple people sitting in the caboose. You had a couple people, walk in the middle. You had a couple people in the front. There were a lot of people on the train because they used to, used to yell at us when we used to jump on and off of them. Now you got 2. They want to go down to 1. So all of those salaries, all those benefits, all that stuff, where'd that go? It went to the shareholders. It went to the wealthy. It went to the CEO. It went to stock buybacks. And then they make these trains miles long. I go into rail yards often. When a train comes in and it's crossing the road, you're sitting for a while because they're miles long. Because we can't have multiple crews. We can't be more efficient in how we send things. So we got to wait for the big giant trains. And it's getting worse. Service is worse. Scheduling is worse. Working conditions are worse. Profits. Oh, that's what's really important. So if the product that you're getting out of it isn't what you need, is there not a way to change that? If the only thing that's working well on the railroads is they're making a lot of money for a handful of people, maybe. And this is where I give Carl credit. I give the UE credit. Coming out and say, it's time to reclaim the commons. I think it's time to reclaim our water and sewer. It's time to reclaim our parking authorities. It's time to reclaim our roads and bridges and you name it. because we are the ones that keep investing in it. We're the ones, every time they run it into the ground, it falls back. It falls back on we, the taxpayers. And this is where we got to wake up to the reality that they're screwing us, that we're getting ripped off. And then telling us, oh, it's trickled down. It's raining. It's raining. Rivers of golden honey. That ain't golden honey. It's yellow, but it ain't golden honey. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1865. That was the day the United States Congress passed the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, abolishing slavery. President Abraham Lincoln had already issued the Emancipation Proclamation, but there was worry that the proclamation, an emergency wartime measure, would not stand up in the courts after the war had ended. The introduction of the amendment first occurred in 1864 as the Civil War raged on. That meant that only Northern legislators were present to debate the issue. Despite this, the amendment failed to pass the House of Representatives. Determined to ensure its passage on the second try, President Lincoln made the amendment part of the National Republican platform for the presidential election. He lobbied heavily for the bill and was able to win enough support for its passage. The New York Times described the scene after the vote in the House of Representatives, writing, "No attempt was made to suppress the applause, which came from all sides, everyone feeling that the occasion justified the fullest expression of approbation and joy." The final amendment read, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist in the United States or any place, subject to their jurisdiction." The amendment then had to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. The ratification marked a fundamental change in the labor system of the United States. No more would the nation be divided by free labor and slave labor laws. Kentucky did not officially ratify the 13th Amendment until 1976, and Mississippi did not follow until 1995. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
An old political saying notes that the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. However, given the proliferation of today's goofball culture wars and fanatical right-wing phobias, that truism should be updated to say evil swarms when power-hungry leaders unleash the crazies. Which brings us to the U.S. House of Representatives, now led by a run-of-the-mill corporate Republican, Kevin McCarthy. He's always been a crassly ambitious political climber, untethered to any moral principle larger than his own ego. So he's not trusted, even by GOP lawmakers. Indeed, in an almost comical public spectacle, it took 4 days and 15 rounds of voting in January before Kevin could cut enough desperate deals to get the slimmest majority of his own Republican colleagues to make him Speaker of the House. To squeak out his win, though, he had to hand big chunks of his official power to a gaggle of extremist, far-right-wing legislators who are, in a word, bonkers. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Paul Gosar, and other members of the GOP's Kooky Caucus promote unhinged QAnon conspiracy theories, warn that Jews are firing lasers from outer space to start wildfires, lionize Vladimir Putin and Adolf Hitler, call for the execution of Democratic leaders, and insist that the government is staging school shootings as an excuse to outlaw guns. Okay, they're nuts, and politics makes strange bedfellows. But McCarthy has not just climbed into bed with them. He's snuggling up tightly, naming them to powerful committees, publicly legitimizing their screwballism, and intentionally bringing the evil of bigotry, intolerance, and even fascism in from the fringe of politics to sit in the seat of power. This is Jim Hightower saying, this is shameful, and it's dangerous. Evil swarms when so-called leaders meekly give permission for crazies to use the government power to rule over us.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So yesterday we spent a little time talking about the Nazi homeschool Evidently now the story has broken that the Ohio Department of Education, they're investigating what they're calling the openly anti-Semitic and racist Nazi homeschooling group with thousands of members across the country operating in Upper Sandusky, Ohio. And look, trust me, this is just the tip of the iceberg. The kind of underground organizing by these hate groups that's just now finally coming out and being exposed should scare all of us. Especially people who believe that public education is how we give people opportunity to grow and move this nation forward. There are folks don't want that. No. I'm here to share some thoughts on his most recent piece on what's going on in the Upper Bucks School District. Because look, the attack on public education is in full rage mode in school districts across the country, and it's no more visible than in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. And here to share some thoughts on what that's going on, I've asked Cyril Michaleko to come talk with us. Cyril is the editor-in-chief over at the Bucks County Beacon. They got a new piece out on it titled "It Takes a Village: Expelling Right-Wing Extremism from Bucks County School Districts." Cyril, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, thanks for having me back on.
So what's going? Let's start with the first question. What's going on? What's happening in your neck of the woods?
I mean, what we're seeing in Bucks County and specifically in Central Bucks School District, is what we're seeing across the country, unfortunately, which is just an all-out right-wing and I would say even Christian nationalist assault on public education. This is an organized, AstroTurf, national kind of campaign. And they've kind of like activated, their little cells of, extremist parents that want to just transform public education into this very narrow, conservative, Christian kind of factory, if you will, where they just want to reproduce kind of like, little versions of themselves and impose their will on everyone else, right? So this is like, for example, book banning has been one of the big issues.
Right.
And the thing is, like, parents have the option to kind of like deny their kids access to certain books, right? But that's not good enough. Like, they want to deny it for every single child and every single parent, and the books that they're targeting, obviously, a lot of them are by LGBTQ writers, writers of color, or characters that represent these different communities.
Right. But what do you say, Cyril, to them who would, I know their response back is going to be, well, the other side is doing exactly what you're saying to us, and we're just fighting back. I mean, because that's the response I get. They're ramming this down our throats, and we don't want it. What do you say to that?
I mean, that's just, I think you have to put this in like historical perspective. And this is just kind of like part of like a long historical backlash, one against progress, right? And then two against, public education. And, it dates back in, this movement, this right-wing movement, they like to use the kind of the banner of like parental rights, right? And that's something that's been invoked like throughout history, starting with when the United States introduced compulsory education, for kids, right? Parents were pissed off. They thought there was the government kind of taking away their authority. And so they were against that, right? And this parental rights movement, which has really just been like I said, like a right-wing and Christian backlash, there's a thread that you can follow throughout history. So, for example, the Scopes trial, right? It was the parental rights movement that didn't want evolution taught in science class. They wanted biblical creationism, right? It was the parental rights movement, again, that reared its head in the 50s with the Supreme Court's Brown versus Board of Education decision. It was the parental rights backlash against them saying that segregation was unconstitutional. So like the parental rights movement, time and again, has been on the wrong side of history. And that's just what we're seeing today. Like this whole Moms for Liberty kind of movement, it comes from this. Like it comes from this lineage,
Now, look, I'm a parental rights person. I don't want the government telling me what I have to do with my kids or any of that. But there's a point at which you go, I don't know, Nazi homeschooling. I think there's got to be something there. I think the kind of absolute extremism that we're seeing, I think there's got to be something there. I don't think that parental rights thing is absolute and unfettered. But I do believe in parental rights and how I want my kids educated. I think I think there's some fairness there, and this is where these right wing groups, they grab a kernel of reality, and they grab people like me who say, yeah, we should have that, and then they take it too far. And I think this is where this is going. It's taking us to this extreme with the goal, at least I think, of destroying public education so they can privatize and profitize.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a lot of these people and the ones that are running for school boards are, essentially arsonists that want to burn down the whole system from within and raise it. And like you said, in order to kind of like privatize education and push like charter schools, etc. But, and again, like, of course, like parents have rights and they have rights to send their kids to like private schools if they want to, but they can't like impose those, um, you know, their vision on everyone else. And what we're seeing is just like it's not like radical things they're going after, right? They're going after teaching history, right? They're going after books. They're going after like teachers being able to have like discussions about history, and our history's messy, right? It's complicated. We're an imperfect nation striving for perfection and trying to kind of continue to progress and to get better. And I think like the danger is, you have, right-wing activists like Christopher Rufo that, created this concept of like critical race theory. And he even admitted it himself. Like the whole idea of that is that to be some kind of like generalized smear and term in order for these parent groups, right, to use and throw at anytime they don't like something.
Sure. No, and look, it's all about feeding the outrage candy. I get that, and scary things. There's a theory out there, and it's critical, and it's about race. So all three of those words are kind of buzzwords to get you kind of ramped up. I get that because they do this masterfully. The right has always been good at feeding outrage candy to people, and it's our job to to kind of put it aside. But here's the thing: the question that I have. How much of this is just a handful of crazy people who are these religious zealots, are Christian Sharia law folks, and how much of this is the rest of society, of the community, and how much traction are they really getting? Do you get any sense of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're a minority, but they're a loud minority, and they've been able to seize power, right, in these school boards. And like, in Central Bucks School District, this is like an affluent Philadelphia, suburb. It's not like it's not very rural by any means, right? And what we're seeing there is just like this school board, was able to seize power thanks in part to Paul Martino, who's like this right-wing venture capitalist who sunk over $700,000 into school board races across the state, right? Because he saw an opportunity. This dates back to like COVID and the outrage that kind of fomented. So he saw this crisis as an opportunity, right? And that's why he was sinking these money into what turned out to be very extremist candidates. And so, for example, like I was trying to make the connection to like, the Christian right and the Christian nationalism. Besides the Bucks County Beacon one, I should just mention, like, there's been great reporting, by other journalists out here. WHYY's Emily Rizzo, USA Today's Network's Chris Olery, and the Inquirer's Maddie Hanna. So, I think people should, if they want to find out more, they can turn to them as well as the Bucks County Beacon. But back to my original point is, for example, the school board recently passed a library policy in order for parents to challenge books, right? But what they didn't tell everyone was that once that policy was passed, then they had to draft administrative regulations, right? In order for like staff and librarians and teachers and administrators to be able to apply that policy. So they outsourced the drafting of these administrative regulations to the Independence Law Center, which is the legal arm of the Pennsylvania Family Institute, right? And so the Pennsylvania Family Institute is a right-wing anti-LGBTQ Christian organization that back in March, and this is something that we reported on, started recruiting informants in public schools because according to them, teachers are proselytizing children into sexual and Marxist ideologies by using coercion and grooming techniques.
They're indoctrinating the children.
Yes. So it's like the John Birch Society meets QAnon with these people. And so one, they outsourced the crafting of the library policy to this organization. And then two, when they got wind that this story was coming out by USA Today Network's Chris Ullery, they sent an district-wide email to all the parents to kind of preempt that and put their own spin on it. But what they didn't, so they tell the parents that, yes, we contacted this Independence Law firm, which it's actually not called firm, it's called the Independence Law Center, but didn't provide the details about who they're affiliated with, because the devil's in the details. And I think a large swath of the parents, I would say a large majority of the parents, would probably at least have some concerns, right, with them kind of turning to this anti-LGBTQ law firm, this Christian law firm, to craft policies where local right-wing activist parents have been targeting LGBTQ books.
Yeah, because the Independence Law Center doesn't sound bad.
Right.
Until you find out what, because this is what, again, the right does a masterful job of this, the Center for, the Love of Puppies, and they at its core, some of the most anti-worker, anti-society, anti-social behavior that you can find, yet again, couching under the terms of some kind of twisted religiosity. I've got friends who are homeschooler folks who, they tell me they're creating Christian warriors, and that kind of language is a little concerning because, we talk about how much we don't want Sharia law, but yet we're seeing springing up around us a kind of that kind of extremism.
No, I mean, absolutely. And like you said, like they take everything too far. And the latest scandal was like a librarian posted a quote by Elie Wiesel, a Holocaust survivor and Nobel Peace Prize winner, that says, "We must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented." Now, according to the school district, this violated one of their other new policies, Policy 321, that kind of reaches towards neutrality in the schools and the classroom, right? So they forced this librarian to take this down, right, until like public outcry and backlash, and then media scrutiny. And then what they did is like, so not only that, to make matters worse, a while back they hired a PR firm, right, that they're spending $15,000 a month on to help launder their image. So now they have this PR firm that's trying to like spin all of these crazy extremist policies and actions that they're taking. And the firm, what they tried to say was that, the using, of course, like the passive voice and trying to kind of like deflect responsibility from people who, from the actual people who ordered this librarian to take it down, was that they wanted the quote like accompanied with the book, that the quote came from. But the quote didn't come from an actual book. It was from his acceptance speech for the Nobel Peace Prize.
Right.
And so like this.
I thought you were going to tell me they banned the book. That would have been that would have been spot on. So let me ask you this, because there are a lot of people who are listening going, okay, well this is Bucks County, Pennsylvania. It's not my school district. This wouldn't happen in my backyard. Can't happen in my neck of the woods. How much of this stuff is spreading across the country, do you think? How much of what you're seeing is being replicated in other places?
It's everywhere. Honestly, it is everywhere. Moms for Liberty are one of the big protagonists of this movement, right? And then you just, look what's happening in Florida, right? One with like Ron DeSantis and with his like don't say gay laws, and just kind of like, booting out, and we're going now towards like higher education. They like boarded out the board of trustees for like New College and replaced him with like Christopher Rufo, who I'd mentioned earlier, and like a gaggle of, his right-wing, fellow travelers. And even like, with the book banning, I mean, it's huge now. And they try to, again, they're trying to say these books are like grooming kids, but they're going after classics too. Like in Florida, in a school district, they took off the shelves actually Fahrenheit 451, right, by Ray Bradbury.
Yeah, my producer, he actually did a piece not too long ago, a school district down, I think York, down in the York area. They were banning a bunch of books, but Mein Kampf was still on the shelves. It's one of those things where you go, okay, where is your priority? And again, Nazi homeschool. It's one of those things that's kind of frightening to me of where we're going. So I guess, the last line of questioning, what do we do? Because look, here's the reality. I talk to parents and the issues that some of these groups use as that lightning rod. There was a school district that had a drag show, in the classroom. And I don't think that's the place for it. Not against drag shows, but in the classroom, not the place for it. But how do you deal with the parents who are going, look at what they've done. I don't want this, but I don't want that, the extremism either. Is there somewhere in the middle ground here? Do you see any hope forward?
I don't, right? Like, I don't see how you're going to reach like a middle ground with a lot of these folks, right? Folks that are accusing librarians and teachers of being groomers because books are
not them. Look, there's a point at which you leave them. You're never reaching the fives. But it's taking people like me who go, you know what? I don't want drag shows in the classroom. I'm told every day there's a drag show in the classroom. These are what these extremists are saying. Every day there's drag shows. In fact, they're forcing my children to come to school in drag. I don't want that. Is there an education process? Is there a way to go, that's not happening? Other than it's not happening in my school, and it's not. I asked my children, it's not happening.
I mean, I think there's a couple of things that we can do here. And one, we were talking about like banning books, which is happening, right?
Which is stupid.
And I think you mentioned York County in Pennsylvania. Like, they banned like I Am Rosa Parks, right? And it was just like this list, and it was like predominantly like African American authors or subjects, topics. What happened there is, and this was interesting, is that students organized against this and they went to school early and started protesting before school early, and it gained like international attention. And eventually the board, because they were so shamed and disgraced, had to reverse the ban. So
there's the answer right there. The young people are going to save us because, well, mom and dad are screwed up.
Yeah, and we're seeing that now happen in Central Bucks where students are getting involved. So, we're seeing that happen, but on the flip side of that, obviously like parents have to get involved and people need to vote in these local elections, right? And just kind of get like reasonable voices back into school boards. And what they have to do is just kind of like cut through the noise. And, social media and kind of like, digital activism's fine, but, you really got to go door to door and talk to these folks. Talk to your neighbors and organize them in that way.
Right there. Cyril, I appreciate the time. Keep up the great work. Hope folks will take a look at your most recent piece. We'll get links out on social media, how you can take a look at it. It takes a village to expel these right-wing extremists. We'll get links out, and you can check out buckscountybeacon.com. Cyril Michaliko, I appreciate the time, man.
Thanks again, Rick.
Thanks so much. Want to hear your thoughts. What are you hearing from your local schools? Do you see this kind of insanity in your local school? And are you okay with it? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1940, and Ida Mae Fuller received a check from the U.S. government. That check was for $22.54. It may seem like a small amount, but the check represented something much larger. It was the very first payment of Social Security. Miss Fuller spent her working years as a teacher and then a legal secretary in Vermont. She paid into the new Social Security program for almost 3 years before she retired. One day, while running errands in Rutland, Vermont, she decided to stop at the Social Security office and find out more about the program. Miss Fuller later recalled, "It wasn't that I expected anything, mind you, but I knew I'd been paying for something called Social Security, and I wanted to ask the people in Rutland about it." The office took her benefits claim and sent it to Washington, D.C. Miss Fuller was the first in a batch of 1,000 claims forwarded to the Treasury Department for processing. She was 65 years old when she received her first check, and as good fortune would have it, Ida lived to see her 100th birthday. In the 35 years that followed, Ida received just under $23,000 in total Social Security benefits over the course of her retirement. In 2014, according to the Social Security Administration, over 59 million Americans will receive nearly $863 billion in benefits. Over the years, Social Security has been expanded to include people with severe disabilities and widows and orphans with survivors' benefits. Although politicians continue to squabble over the program and refuse to ensure its long-term solvency, Social Security remains one of the most significant programs enacted by the U.S. government for working people. In the aftermath of the 2008 Great Collapse on Wall Street that saw the retirement of millions of workers evaporate, Social Security continued, keeping upwards of 22 million seniors out of poverty. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. So, it's another one of these examples of people pointing their fingers saying, "I know you're cheating. I know. And then the three fingers pointing back at them. The person screaming the loudest is generally the person who's, I don't know, doing what they're screaming about. I look at this place, The Villages, down in Florida. They're the ones who do the golf cart thing. They have their Trump golf cart, parades, and I think they had the boat that sank, if I'm not mistaken. I think that was part of them as well. Evidently, fourth resident of The Villages has now admitted that they voted twice in the 2020 election. Didn't seem to help much, still lost. But it's one of these things where you go, again, these four people out there going, "Oh, no, there are people voting twice. I know that." Yeah, they were looking at him in the mirror. Yeah, see how that works? They found him. They found the person cheating. Every morning they found that person looking back at him in the mirror. Why didn't they turn themselves in? And here's the thing. I actually got a response from someone who says, "But you said there's no voter fraud." I don't know where to go with that, other than they deliberately broke the law because they believed other people were, and now they think they're going to get away with it. It's stupid. I mean, wow. And again, this just to me is another one of those magnifying moments where you go, we're in trouble as a society. We really are. Because these are the people who were protesting. These are the people who are out in the street saying our system's broken, and are the reason that it's broken. I've said in the past that the cost, the penalty to do what these four people have now admitted to doing is so high that no sane, rational, reasonable, thoughtful person would ever do it. And yet, there they are, four of them, neighbors. And you go, well, it's Florida. Okay, maybe that's the reason. Or maybe it's just, the cult? Wow. But I now amend. There is voter fraud, and Republicans seem to be the ones that keep doing it. Now I hope they get full maximum penalties, because you know if they'd have caught a Democrat doing it, oh boy, oh boy, they'd be calling for executions. Now they just have sad looks on their face. If you missed any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast. Wherever you find your favorite podcast, you'll find ours. You got thoughts, questions, comments, I want to hear it. Thanks for tuning in. See you back here next time.
To the Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.